The night was cold and the wind howled through the small village of Doma. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the rain fell softly over the quiet fields. Most people were asleep, but one man was still awake, Kofi, a simple farmer who lived alone near the river. He was sitting by his small fire, mending a broken basket, when he suddenly heard a strange sound. At first he thought it was the wind. But then he heard it again, a weak cry, soft and desperate, cutting through the rain. Kofi stood up quickly, his heart beating fast. He grabbed his lantern and stepped outside. The night was dark and the ground was wet beneath his bare feet. The cry came again, this time from the direction of the river. He followed the sound, moving carefully through the mud and grass. When he reached the riverbank, he stopped and listened. The cry was louder now. He lifted his lantern and looked around. Then he saw her, a tiny baby lying under a tree, wrapped in a torn cloth, her skin pale from the cold. Kofi gasped and ran to her side. The child's little hands were trembling, and her face was wet with rain and tears. "Oh, dear child," he whispered, lifting her gently. "Who would leave you here?" He quickly wrapped her in his own cloth and held her close to his chest. She was light as a feather, and her small fingers clung weakly to his shirt. Kofi looked around again, hoping to see someone, a mother, a traveler, anyone, but there was no one. The rain washed away every footprint, and the night kept its silence. He hurried back home with the baby in his arms. Inside his small hut, he placed her near the fire and dried her with a soft cloth. He gave her a few drops of warm milk and watched her tiny mouth move slowly. Soon her crying stopped and she fell asleep, her face peaceful and calm. Kofi sat beside her all night, watching her chest rise and fall. He could not sleep. He wondered who she was and why someone would abandon such a precious life. When morning came, he went to the village chief to report what he had found. The elders gathered and listened to his story. They sent men to look for anyone who had lost a baby, but no one came forward. Days passed and no family was found. Finally, the elders told Kofi he could keep her until someone appeared. From that day his life changed. The baby filled his lonely hut with laughter and warmth. He named her Amma, which means gift, because he believed she was sent to him by the gods. Every morning, he would carry her on his back to the farm, singing softly as he worked. At night, he would tell her stories about the moon, the stars, and the spirits of the land. The villagers often came to see them. They smiled and said, "Kofi has found joy again." He was no longer the quiet, lonely farmer people once pitied. He laughed more, worked harder, and even began planting flowers around his hut. Amma grew quickly. Her small eyes shone like sunlight, and her laughter filled every corner of Kofi's home. She learned to call him Baba, and every time she said it, his heart felt warm. He loved her as if she were his own blood. Months passed and life seemed peaceful. But one afternoon a letter arrived from the city. A traveler brought it to the village chief. It was from a woman, Amma's aunt, who had heard rumors of a baby found near the river. She wanted to come to Doma to see if it was true. When she arrived, she was a thin, tired-looking woman with eyes full of sorrow. She explained that Amma's mother had died during childbirth, and in fear and confusion, someone had left the baby by the river, thinking she would be found. The woman fell to her knees and wept when she saw Amma. Kofi stood quietly holding the child. His heart felt heavy. He knew what it meant. The woman was Amma's only family. The elders decided that Amma should go with her aunt, who promised to care for her in the city. That night, Kofi sat by the fire with Amma sleeping in his lap. He looked at her face, memorizing every feature, her tiny nose, her round cheeks, her soft hands. He whispered, "My little Amma, you came into my life like light in darkness. You will always be my daughter, even when you are far away." The next morning the aunt came to take her. The whole village gathered to say goodbye. Kofi handed Amma over, his eyes wet with tears. She reached out her little arms toward him, crying softly, not understanding why she was leaving. "Be strong," he told her, forcing a smile. "Go and live a good life, my child." As the cart moved away, Kofi stood still, watching until they disappeared down the dusty road. The wind blew gently, carrying the faint sound of Amma's cry. He turned back toward his empty hut, feeling the weight of silence around him. That night he sat alone by the fire, just as he had the night he found her. The basket he had mended still lay beside him, unfinished. He picked it up but could not work. The sound of the rain reminded him of her first night, how tiny and helpless she was, and how she had filled his home with laughter and life. He closed his eyes and prayed. May she grow strong, may she be happy. Let her always be safe. From that day Kofi went back to his quiet life, but something inside him had changed. The house no longer felt empty, it carried the memory of the child who once slept by his fire. The villagers often saw him smiling to himself when he worked in the fields. When they asked why, he would say, "Because even if she is far, my gift still lives." He still looked toward the road sometimes, half hoping to see a small girl running back to him. The river still whispered at night, and the wind still carried echoes of her laughter. Kofi kept her cloth folded neatly by his bedside, a reminder of the night love found him in the rain. The years passed slowly in the quiet village of Doma. Seasons came and went and Kofi grew older. His life was not easy, but he worked hard and stayed humble. After Amma was taken to the city, he lived alone in his small hut near the river. He missed her laughter, the sound of her tiny feet, and the way she used to call him Baba. Yet he found comfort in his work. He spent his days on the farm, planting yams and maize. When the sun rose, he was already in the field. When it set, he would sit by his fire, eat his simple meal, and listen to the night birds. He became known in Doma as a man of peace, always ready to help, never quick to speak harshly. In time, he married a gentle woman named Ajoa. She had a soft voice and a kind heart. For a few years they shared a quiet happiness. She brought warmth into his lonely home, and though they had no children, their love was strong. Ajoa often told Kofi, "The gods reward good hearts in their own time." He would smile and answer, "My reward already lives in my memories." He was speaking of Amma, though Ajoa never grew jealous of that love. She understood. But life in the village was fragile. One rainy season, Ajoa fell sick. At first it seemed like a small fever, but it grew worse each day. Kofi tried everything, herbs, prayers, even long walks to distant healers, but nothing helped. One morning before the sun rose, she took his hand, smiled faintly and whispered, "Do not live in sorrow. The world still needs your kindness." Then she was gone. Kofi sat beside her body for hours, silent and still. The house felt colder than it had ever been. When the villagers came to comfort him, he only nodded and thanked them. But that night, when everyone had left, he sat by the fire and wept quietly. He had known loss before, but this time it felt deeper, like a wound that refused to close. The next day he buried her under the old mango tree behind his hut. He planted flowers there and visited every morning, speaking to her as if she were still alive. "The farm is doing well," he would say softly. "And the sky was clear today. You would have liked it." Years passed. His hair turned gray and his steps grew slower. Still he worked the land and helped others. When a widow's roof broke, Kofi fixed it. When a traveler lost his way, Kofi shared his food. The children in the village loved him. They called him Grandfather Kofi and often came to listen to his stories. But every time he saw a young girl running through the fields, his heart would ache with the memory of Amma. He often wondered where she was, if she was happy, if she remembered him, if she still carried the small bracelet he had tied on her wrist the day she left. He prayed that she lived a good life and that the gods watched over her. Far away in the city, Amma was indeed growing into a bright young woman. Her aunt, Auntie Isai, treated her with care, though life in the city was not easy. They lived in a small house near the market, and Amma helped her aunt sell fruits and groundnuts. She was quick to learn, polite, and full of energy. Everyone in their neighborhood liked her. But deep in her heart, Amma always felt a missing piece, a gap she could not explain. She often dreamed of a night filled with rain and a man's warm arms lifting her from the cold. She could never see his face clearly, but she always woke up with tears in her eyes. When she asked her aunt about her parents, Auntie Isai only said, "Your mother died when you were born. That is all you need to know." Still, Amma's heart longed for answers. She grew up wondering who she truly was and where she came from. Sometimes, when she passed the river in the city, she would stop and stare at the water, feeling something strange, a soft pull as if the river whispered her name. As she grew older, Amma worked hard in school. She wanted to become a teacher so she could help children who had no one to guide them. She believed that knowledge could change lives just as kindness once saved hers, though she did not know who that kindness had come from. She often helped poor children in her neighborhood, sharing her lunch or helping them read. Her aunt would watch her and smile sadly. "You have a heart too big for this world," she would say. Amma would laugh and reply, "Maybe it is not big, maybe it just remembers what love feels like." Back in Doma, Kofi had become a quiet legend. The elders respected him, the young ones trusted him. He was the first to arrive at the farms during planting season and the last to leave. When the village had meetings, he sat under the baobab tree, listening more than he spoke. People often came to him for advice, about crops, marriages, or quarrels. But when he was alone, he sometimes took long walks to the river. There he would sit on a rock and stare at the water flowing past. "Do you remember that night?" he would whisper. "Do you still carry her scent, her tiny cry?" He would drop small flowers into the river and watch them drift away. "Take these to her," he would say. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky orange, he thought he saw a shadow of a young girl on the water, laughing, running. He smiled sadly, knowing it was only his memory playing tricks on him. Yet in his heart he believed he would see Amma again. Maybe not soon, maybe not even in this life, but someday. He often told the village children, "Love never dies, it only changes its shape." They would giggle, not fully understanding, but his words stayed in their hearts. Amma in the city also carried a quiet faith. She often said to herself, "One day I will go back to where I came from. Maybe then I will find what I have been missing." She didn't know that far away in a small village beside a calm river, an old man whispered her name every night before he slept. The same stars watched over them both, the same moonlight touched their faces, and the same gentle wind carried their memories between the city and the village. Neither knew that destiny was slowly turning its wheel, that their paths would cross again in a way no one could have imagined. But for now, Kofi continued to work with quiet strength, and Amma continued to chase her dreams. Both carried a piece of the same story in their hearts, one as a memory, the other as a mystery waiting to be found. Many years had passed since Amma left the small village of Doma. She was now a grown woman, kind and full of purpose. After finishing her studies in the city, she decided to join a charity that sent young teachers to rural schools. When she looked at the list of places she could go, one name caught her eye: Doma. She did not know why, but the name felt familiar. Something in her heart whispered that she had to go there. The journey was long. The bus moved slowly on the dusty road that led to the village. Amma looked out the window, watching the green fields, tall trees, and small mud houses pass by. With every mile, she felt something deep inside her stir, a strange feeling of comfort and sadness mixed together. When the bus finally stopped at Doma, she stepped down and took a deep breath. The air smelled of wet earth and mango trees. It felt like home, even though she had never been there before, at least not that she could remember. She carried her 2 small bags and started walking toward the village school. The road was rough, and the afternoon sun was hot. Her feet ached and her bag felt heavy. Just then, a voice called from behind her, "Young woman, do you need help?" Amma turned around and saw an old man walking slowly with a stick. His hair was gray, his face lined with age, but his eyes were bright and kind. He smiled warmly at her. "Oh, thank you, sir," she said politely. "I'm looking for the school. I came to teach here." The man nodded. "Ah, the new teacher. I heard someone was coming today. Let me help you with those bags." She tried to protest, but he insisted gently, "No, no. Let an old man feel useful today." He lifted one of her bags with surprising strength. Together they walked down the narrow path toward the school. As they walked, they talked. The man told her stories about the village, the crops, the river, the market, and how the children loved to learn even though they had little. Amma listened with interest. "You must know this village very well," she said. He chuckled softly. "I've lived here all my life. My name is Kofi." She smiled. "I'm Amma." Kofi stopped for a second, the name echoing in his mind like a distant song. He looked at her face, her eyes, her smile, her calm way of speaking. Something deep inside him stirred, but he said nothing. He only nodded and smiled. "Welcome home, Amma." When they reached the school, Kofi placed her bag near the door and told her where to find water and food. The children soon gathered around, shy but curious about the new teacher from the city. Amma laughed and spoke kindly to them. Kofi stood nearby, watching quietly. There was something about her, a light, a warmth, that reminded him of someone he once held in his arms long ago. That evening, Amma walked through the village. She met the women cooking near their homes, the men playing drums, and the elders sitting under the big tree. Everywhere she went, people welcomed her warmly. The teacher from the city, they called her. She smiled and thanked them all. When she passed by the river, she stopped and looked at the flowing water. It was peaceful and clear, the sound gentle and familiar. She felt a strange pull in her heart, as if the river was whispering her name. For a moment she closed her eyes and saw flashes in her mind: rain, a soft cloth, strong arms lifting her from the cold. She opened her eyes quickly, confused but calm. That night she stayed in a small room near the school. She couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to the old man who helped her. There was something comforting about him, his voice, his gentle smile. She didn't know why, but when she talked to him she felt safe, as if she had known him all her life. The next day she began teaching. The children loved her right away. She taught them songs, numbers, and stories. She used simple games to help them learn. The sound of laughter filled the classroom, and even the villagers came to watch. Kofi often stood outside, smiling proudly. He fixed the broken windows, carried firewood for the cooking pot, and made sure the children had clean water to drink. Amma often invited him to sit and talk after class. They shared stories about their lives, his years of farming, her days in the city. Sometimes when she spoke, Kofi would close his eyes and listen carefully, as if her voice carried a forgotten melody. One afternoon when the sky was turning orange, Amma brought him some food. They sat together under the old mango tree. She said softly, "You remind me of someone, Baba Kofi. When I was small, I used to dream of a man who lifted me from the rain. I could never see his face, but I always felt safe in his arms. Your voice feels like his." Kofi's heart skipped a beat. He looked at her closely, his old hands trembling slightly. "Do you remember anything else?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No. Just the rain and the warmth." He smiled faintly and said, "Dreams sometimes come from real memories. Maybe life has brought you here for a reason." Amma laughed gently. "Maybe it has." From that day on they grew closer. Amma often visited him after school to listen to his wisdom. The villagers began to notice their bond. Some said, "The young teacher and the old farmer are like father and daughter." Kofi would smile each time he heard that. He didn't tell anyone what he suspected, that the girl he once found by the river might be standing before him again. Sometimes when he was alone, he would take out a small cloth he had kept for years, the same torn piece that had wrapped the baby he rescued long ago. He would hold it, close his eyes, and whisper, "Amma." The name now had two faces, the baby from the past and the young woman from the present. One evening, a heavy rain began to fall. Amma ran to Kofi's hut for shelter. They sat by the fire as the thunder rolled outside. The sound of the rain brought tears to Kofi's eyes. He remembered that night so many years ago, the same rain, the same cries, the same miracle. Amma noticed his silence. "Baba Kofi," she said softly, "are you all right?" He nodded slowly, his voice trembling. "Yes, my child. The rain brings back old memories." She smiled and said, "Rain always feels like it's washing away sadness." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes shining with something between joy and pain. Then he simply said, "You are right, my child. Sometimes rain brings life back." The storm lasted all night, but inside the small hut, warmth filled the air. The bond between them grew deeper, though neither yet understood the truth behind it. In the days that followed, Amma continued her teaching with love and energy. Kofi continued to watch over her like a silent guardian. Though the years had aged his face, his heart felt young again, as if the baby he once lost had somehow found her way home. The evening was calm and quiet. The golden light of the setting sun painted the village of Doma in warm colors. Birds were returning to their nests, and the sound of children's laughter echoed from afar. Amma sat outside Kofi's hut, marking her students' notebooks. The air smelled of roasted corn, and the wind carried the sound of the nearby river, soft and steady, like a song that had no end. Kofi came out with 2 wooden cups of warm tea and handed one to her. "You've worked too hard today," he said with a gentle smile. "Rest a little, my daughter." Amma smiled back. "Thank you, Papa Kofi," she said softly. Though she had only recently started calling him that, the name came naturally to her lips. She didn't know why, but it felt right, as if her heart had known it long before her mind did. They sat in silence for a while, watching the orange glow fade into night. The stars began to appear, one by one, bright and clear. Amma felt peaceful, but something had been weighing on her mind for days. She wanted to tell Kofi about it, a secret she had carried for as long as she could remember. She put down her cup and looked at him. "Papa Kofi," she began quietly, "can I tell you something?" He turned to her, his face calm but curious. "Of course, my child. What troubles you?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "All my life I have had a dream. It feels more like a memory than a dream. I see myself as a small baby, lying on the ground near a river. It's raining and I'm crying. Then someone picks me up, strong hands, warm arms, and carries me to safety. I can never see his face, but I feel safe. I feel loved." Kofi froze. His hand shook slightly and the cup he was holding almost slipped. He turned his face away quickly so she wouldn't see his tears. His heart began to beat fast, the old memories rushing back like a flood. He could hear again the cry of that tiny baby in the rain, see the torn cloth, feel the small heartbeat against his chest. Amma continued softly, unaware of his struggle. My aunt once told me that I was found as a baby near a river, by a man whose name she didn't know. I always wondered who he was. I used to imagine him sometimes, to thank him in my prayers. But I never thought I would meet him. Kofi could no longer hold back his emotions. His old eyes filled with tears and his lips trembled as he whispered, "Amma, oh my child." She looked at him, confused. "What is it, Papa Kofi?" He took a deep breath and looked straight into her eyes. "The man your aunt spoke of," he said softly, his voice breaking, "was me." Amma stared at him, her eyes wide in shock. "You?" she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Yes, child. It was a cold night many years ago. I heard your cries near the river. You were so small, wrapped in an old cloth. I took you home, warmed you by the fire, and named you Amma, because you were a gift. For months I cared for you until your aunt came. I didn't want to let you go, but I knew it was right. I prayed every day that life would treat you kindly." Amma's lips trembled. Her heart began to race. The tears came before she could stop them. You found me," she said, her voice shaking. Kofi nodded again, tears now rolling down his wrinkled cheeks. "Yes, my child. And all these years I thought I would never see you again. But when you came to this village, something in me knew. The way you spoke, the kindness in your eyes, it reminded me of the baby I once held. I wanted to tell you many times, but I was afraid it would be too much for you." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The sound of the river filled the silence. Then Amma slowly stood up, her eyes full of tears but her face glowing with emotion. She walked over to Kofi and knelt beside him. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around him tightly. "Then you are my true father," she whispered against his shoulder. "You are the one who gave me life again." Kofi held her close, his old hands trembling as he stroked her hair. "No, my daughter," he said softly, his voice filled with love, "you gave me life. The day I found you, I was a lonely man with an empty heart. You brought light into my home. Even after you left, that light never faded." Amma wept quietly, her tears soaking his shirt. "All these years I wondered who I was," she said. "Now I know. I was never abandoned, I was found." Kofi smiled through his tears. "Yes, my Amma. The gods never forgot you. They only waited for the right time to bring you back." They sat there for a long time, father and daughter, holding each other under the stars. The night seemed brighter, as if the sky itself rejoiced in their reunion. Later, Amma took out a small silver bracelet from her bag, a bracelet she had always kept though she didn't know why. "I've had this since I was a baby," she said softly. "My aunt said it was found with me." Kofi's eyes widened. His old hands trembled as he took the bracelet. "I tied this on your wrist the day I named you," he said. "You still have it." Amma smiled through her tears. "Then it means the bond was never broken." Kofi nodded, his voice filled with emotion. "Some things never break. Love is one of them." After that night, everything changed between them, not in a strange way but in a deeper, more beautiful one. Amma began to visit Kofi every evening. She cooked for him, cleaned his small hut and made sure he took his medicine. She would read to him and he would tell her stories about her childhood in Doma, how she laughed as a baby, how she used to play with his old hat, how the villagers loved her smile. Whenever she passed by the river, she would stop and whisper, "Thank you." It was no longer just a river to her, it was the place where her life began twice. The villagers soon learned the truth. They were moved by the story and began calling Amma the daughter of the river and Kofi the man of mercy. People came from nearby towns to hear how destiny had brought them back together. At night, when Amma sat beside Kofi by the fire, he would sometimes say softly, "I thought I lost you forever." Amma would smile and answer, "You never lost me, Papa. You just waited long enough for the world to bring me home." And in that quiet village, under the watch of the same stars that once saw a lonely farmer rescue a crying baby, a story of love, fate and reunion lived again, not written in books but in hearts that would never forget. The years passed softly, like gentle waves against the riverbank. Time moved slowly in the quiet village of Doma, and life continued its simple rhythm. The sun still rose over the golden fields, the children still played by the river, and the wind still whispered through the tall trees. But inside Amma's small house, life had changed. Kofi, now old and frail, spent most of his days resting on his wooden bed near the window. His hair was white like cotton, and his hands trembled when he lifted his cup. Yet his smile never faded, and his heart remained full of peace. Amma stayed by his side every day. She had become his eyes, his hands, and his strength. She cooked his food, washed his clothes, and told him stories from the school where she still taught. Every evening, she would sit beside him and read from an old Bible, and Kofi would listen with closed eyes and a calm heart. Sometimes, when the sun went down and the orange light filled the room, Kofi would hold her hand and say softly, "Amma, my child, you have been my greatest blessing." And she would smile, though her eyes filled with tears. "No, Papa," she would whisper, "you were mine." The villagers often came to visit. They loved to see the bond between the old man and the woman he had saved long ago. Children would run to Kofi, sit by his chair and listen to his stories about kindness and hope. He told them about the night he found a baby near the river, how he held her close, and how love turned strangers into family. As the days passed, Kofi grew weaker. His voice became softer and his steps slower. Amma knew his time was coming, but she never left his side. She wanted his last days to be filled with comfort, not sorrow. She sang for him the same lullabies she used to sing for her students, and he would smile faintly, saying, "Your voice still sounds like the rain, gentle and full of life." One evening the sky turned gray and rain began to fall softly. Amma sat beside Kofi's bed, holding his hand. He looked out the window, his eyes following the raindrops. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. "The rain, just like the night I found you." Amma squeezed his hand. "I remember your story, Papa," she said, her voice trembling. "And I'll never forget it." Kofi smiled weakly. "You must promise me something," he said slowly. "Promise me that you will keep helping others like I once helped you. Let our story not end here." Tears rolled down Amma's cheeks. "I promise," she said softly. Kofi nodded, his eyes filled with peace. "Then my heart can rest." That night, as the rain continued to fall, Kofi took his last breath. His hand rested in Amma's, and his face carried a calm smile, as if he had simply fallen asleep after a long good life. Amma cried quietly, her heart breaking but also full of gratitude. She whispered, "Thank you, Papa. You gave me everything." The whole village mourned Kofi's passing. People came from far and near to pay their respects. They spoke of his kindness, his wisdom, and the love he shared so freely. The children brought flowers to his grave by the river, and the elders said prayers for his soul. After the funeral, Amma sat by the river for a long time. The water flowed gently, the same as it had years ago when her life began anew. She looked at her reflection in the water and said softly, "You gave me life, and now I must give life to others." From that day, Amma decided to build something in his memory, something that would keep his love alive forever. With the help of the villagers, she started an orphanage near the riverbank. It took months of hard work and sacrifice. She sold her jewelry, used her savings, and even taught extra classes to earn money. The villagers helped too. Some carried stones, others brought wood, and the children gathered flowers to plant in the yard. When it was finally complete, the orphanage stood proudly beside the river. It was painted in soft colors, with wide windows and a garden full of flowers. On the front wall, Amma placed a wooden sign that read, "The river's gift." The first day the children arrived, Amma felt her heart fill with warmth. They came in small groups, some orphans, some abandoned, some lost. Their eyes carried sadness, but their hearts were full of hope. Amma welcomed each one with open arms, just as Kofi had once welcomed her. "Here," she said softly, "you are not forgotten. You are loved." Every morning, the sound of laughter filled the orphanage. The children ran, played, and learned together. Amma taught them not only reading and writing but also kindness and compassion. In the evenings, she would gather them around the fire and tell them the story of the old farmer who saved a baby from the river. They always listened with wide eyes, holding their breath as she reached the end of the tale. "And that baby," she would say with a smile, "was me." The children would gasp and one of them would whisper, "Then you are the baby from the story." Amma would nod. "Yes. And the man who saved me, he taught me that love can change a life forever." She often sat by the river watching the sunset, remembering Kofi. In her heart, she still heard his voice saying, "Let our story not end here." And she knew it never would. As the years went by, the river's gift became a place of hope for many. People from other towns came to visit and to help. Some donated books and clothes, others offered food or money. Amma always greeted them kindly, and when they asked why she had built the orphanage, she would smile and say, "Because one man chose kindness, I found my life." Her words touched everyone who heard them. Soon, her story spread beyond Doma. Journalists came to write about the orphanage, calling it a home born from mercy. The government even sent support to help it grow. But Amma never cared for fame or money, she only cared about the children who called her Mama Amma. Every child who left the orphanage carried her love with them. Some became teachers, some farmers, some doctors, but all of them remembered her lessons about kindness. They often returned to visit her, bringing gifts and stories of how they helped others. One day when Amma was old and her hair had turned silver, she sat under the big tree by the river, surrounded by the children she had raised. The sound of laughter filled the air. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Papa Kofi, your love still lives." The wind blew softly, touching her cheek like a gentle hand, and she smiled. At the orphanage gate, a new wooden sign had been added beside the old one. It said, "Founded in memory of Kofi, the man whose kindness gave birth to many hearts." Amma often told the children, "Kindness is like a river. It never ends. It just finds new paths." And so, in the quiet village of Doma, beside the same river that had once carried a lost baby and an old man's act of mercy, the story of Kofi and Amma lived on, not in sorrow but in love that kept flowing from one generation to another. The villagers said that whenever it rained, it was the river's way of blessing the river's gift. And sometimes the children would stand outside, stretch out their arms and dance in the rain, just as Amma once had, believing that somewhere in the drops, Papa Kofi's spirit smiled upon them.